Welcome back. It's still the breakfast on Plus TV Africa. A lot of times the issue of inclusive education, has been talked about. How do we ensure that, people living with one form of disability, people who are autistic, people who have Down syndrome are actually, in schools together with other people, and that way they can interact better. The inclusion of students with autism in the general classroom can minimize stigma against autism while students learn how to communicate appropriately with one another. Having a student with autism in a general classroom also reduces negativity associated with autism, and children will learn how to work with one another. Now, joining us now to discuss autism awareness and inclusivity in education is Doyinsola-Adebomehin. Many thanks for joining us on the breakfast on Plus TV Africa.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, good morning to you. All right, let's talk about autism and inclusive education right now. Why do we need to ensure that children who are autistic stay in the same classrooms with other students?
The very main reasons, like you have said, one of the core reasons is to help them develop maximally. So when you talk about autism, we know that some of the things they have typically three challenges in three major areas. One of them is in the making eye contact and paying attention to people. Another is in the social interaction domain, and then the third would be in they tend to have some stereotypical behavior, some things that they do repeatedly that can be unsettling to others. But those are actually things that calm them down. So if social interaction, like we have identified, the major challenge, then their being in a classroom with other people would, one, help them develop that maximally, because in that environment, they will be charged to do things. There will be other typical children there who will encourage them to pay attention, to do things, to give back, as the case may be. For instance, in an inclusive environment, you have children, usually the age mate of that particular, the child now, the child living with autism. And we have identified that children, whether they are typical, that's without autism, or atypical living with autism, they tend to take instruction and bond more with people their age. So if you have them in the environment where they have people their age, you will find that they will listen more to them because they speak more of their language. They would listen to them, they would pay attention to them, and they would also be forced to learn the social skills that they ordinarily missed when they were still, dealing with the autism maximally. But now when they begin intervention, the other children will be there to pull them along. The other children will be there to guide them, to guide them as well. And so they tend to learn better. And one other thing about that is that having an inclusive setting, having children with autism in the classroom is not only for the children living with autism, it's also for the other children, because they learn to pay attention, they learn to identify that some people are different and they do things differently. They learn to identify that in spite of the fact that Jack is different, he's still able to do certain things, and there are other things that he will do much better than they would, so he will get to learn from them. So it's a win-win situation. It promotes social interaction both ways, for the children who are typical and for the children who are atypical. And it also encourages camaraderie and more bonding. And that way, everybody gets better.
Okay, but can you quickly take us through, for some persons who might not really understand what autism is about, what autism really is, and are there causes of it? Is it, hereditary? Is it just that a lot of persons are born with it? And how can you also identify, children with autism?
Right, thank you for that. So autism is a neurological disorder, and it usually has more of a social impact, because a person who is living with autism is usually, like I said, they're not able to, they tend to be in a world of their own. autism itself comes from the word that says self. So you find that they kind of like shut every other thing out, and they live an existence that suggests that they have always been on their own all the while. Because all of the mannerisms that happen in the environment around them in their homes, they tend not to pay attention and they tend not to do it. As human beings, we're social people and we learn by immersion. So when you have a baby in your home, no one taught the baby to talk. That's for a baby who is typical. No one would sit them down and say, mama, say, give me the bottle. They would learn it by being in the environment. If it is something that is said around them regularly, then they also tend to say it. If they see an adult that every morning the adult stands up from the bed, they wiggle their fingers and then they dance around and then they go to eat, you will find that a point will come when the child will wake up in the morning, wiggle their hands, dance around, and then go to eat. Because that's what they have seen repeatedly. That's not the case in a child living with autism. A person living with autism, it doesn't matter how many times you wiggle your fingers up and dance around, they're not going to repeat it until you create a form of intervention that makes them pay attention to those things and you walk them through the process and you help them learn it. So that being a challenge, it means that a person living with autism would not acknowledge things in the environment, they would not acknowledge people, they would not be able to communicate appropriately. They also tend to have some sensory processing disorders. That means that, for instance, you and I get into a room and there's a loud noise, we know that we cover our ears like this. And that way we kind of like shut off most of the extra noise that might be disturbing to us. But in the case of a person living with autism, they're not aware of what exactly to do. So they tend to scream, run around, flap their fingers, look out of the corner of their eyes like that, do all sorts of things, throw themselves against surfaces or items or people, rub walls and do things like that because they are not able to channel their emotions and their feelings the way you and I have learned by being in a particular environment to channel it. So they are different and they tend to be disrupted because they're not following the norm. They're not following the natural order that you and I would follow by virtue of being able to see things in our environment and to move with them.
So are you saying that one of the challenge of, to how to identify or the difficulties with those with autism would be speech difficulties? They're not able to speak or speak properly.
Okay. That is a fact. That's what the case with all of them. There's some that have no problem at all with their speech, but they have problems with their communication. So communication is a major challenge with them. Interacting, being able to see, read emotions, being able to know boundaries, that's also a problem with them. And then, like I said, there's some stereotypical behavior that they have. They're usually called maladaptive. You'll find that one of the things that they do, some of them stand on their tippy toes. That's how they stand and that's how they move around. Others flap their hands very, very often or wiggle their fingers. They do things like that. Then while they do not make eye contact, they tend to be fixated on certain objects in the environment. There are also instances where you have a person living with autism insisting on holding onto a particular item at every point in time, sometimes even in their sleep. They're still holding onto the item, and if you try to get it from them, there's a problem. They have challenges with sound. Certain sounds that you and I don't hear, like flushing of toilets, they tend to hear it and they react to it, but you and I don't hear it, so we wonder what it is. So we continue to say, they just cry, they just scream, they just throw tantrums for no reason. There's no reason. It's not ever no reason. It's that we can't identify what the reasons are. They have sensitivity to sound, to light, to textures as well. Some of them have challenges wearing particular types of fabric or eating certain types of food or even touching certain surfaces. There's some who find it difficult to walk bare feet on sand or gravel or grass. So all of these things that come together. But then having said that, not every child who has sensory challenges walking on grass or gravel or cold ground has autism. For you to say that that child, for it to be identified and be diagnosed. There has to be communication challenges, not necessarily just speech, but communication, eye contact, social interaction, and then the stereotypical behaviors are usually in place. So when I say communication, for instance, there's some people who, even adults who would say, um, uh, I want to eat, but they're not communicating. So they have to be able to say properly and be able to give so that you understand, and they can also take back. So it's a give and take, being able to engage in a conversation and that. So that's what it is.
All right. So from all that you have said so far, children who have autism, they have special needs, right?
They do.
Okay. So would it be wrong for parents who are so concerned about these children, they feel that they are not, in sync with maybe other siblings that they may have, and they are worried, and they feel the only way they can help these children is to send them to special schools. That's what they often do most of the times. But now you are advocating inclusivity in education. Another thing that comes to mind right now would be qualified teachers. In our general schools, I don't know, maybe some schools in Lagos might have, but schools across Nigeria, are we prepared to take on autistic children on a regular basis?
Thank you so much for that. Yes, we advocate for inclusion for children living with autism, but at the same time, there are certain things that need to be in place before then. Not every child is ready to undergo inclusion at any particular point in time. There are certain structures, needs that have to be in place for that to be. One of it is, if I have my child who is very, very active, he's running around the place, he's grabbing things, pushing things, because that's him just coming out, right? If I put that child in a typical classroom environment, they're not going to do much learning because they will not be able to settle down. They will not be making the eye contact. They probably can't do group, they can't respond to group instructions. It usually has to be one-on-one. So at that point in time, there's usually a need for them to be in an environment where they get that one-on-one intervention. And that environment is usually what's called a special needs center. So what we find from my experience is that most of the time, they tend to have to start off in a special needs center or school or whatever it's called, but an environment where they get one-on-one intervention that caters to their specific needs at any point in time. And once they begin to get that, part of it will be channeled towards helping them learn to settle down, helping them make eye contact, develop the ability to look at whatever is being presented to them, and also helping them communicate in certain instances, even if it's just use words or phrases, or where they have no speech at all, we have what we call the pictures exchange system, where they have a picture and they hold up the picture of what they want. In that case, you will not have a child who wants to use the toilet dancing around and screaming. He's just going to hold up the picture, and then the teacher knows that, okay, this child needs to go to the toilet, and then they excuse him and let him go. So once the child has acquired the skills of being able to settle down in the environment, being able to pay attention, even if it's not too much, but the attention that every time you redirect them to say, Jack, look, Jack looks, even if it's only for 3 seconds, so you quickly present, and then you give some time to say, Jack, look again, and then you continue that way. So once those areas have been covered, and the child is beginning to attend, engage with the other person talking, and is also able to be in an environment without getting sensory overload from other people being there, then we say, yes, they're ready for inclusion. And when they do get into inclusion, we find that, like I said earlier, they tend to thrive better. I think, look, I missed what the other question was. Can you say that again, please?
The other question I asked would be, how equipped schools are, specifically about teachers in regular schools who can actually handle these children who have special needs.
Okay, thank you so much. Schools are beginning to evolve into inclusion. For instance, I'm aware that Lagos State actually started to incorporate inclusion into some of the schools, and they have I'm not sure, but over 10 schools that have been adopted for that. One of them is a Maryland school. It's a Maryland school. It's a Maryland, sorry, and there they have an inclusive section where they have people with different special needs, not just autism in this case. They have the hearing impaired, they have some who are visually impaired, they have them there. And we actually work with them there. And what we find is that what we also do, I work at the Learning Place Center, and what we do as part of our giving back and equipping the world, Nigeria, Lagos, to take charge and to accommodate these children is we tend to have trainings for them regularly. And at those trainings, we bring together the teachers who have been designated, and we take them through certain processes, and we encourage them to do it back. And we also try to maintain checks that they're actually doing those things right. So schools are coming up, and also private schools are beginning to train more. They're beginning to encourage their teachers to learn, to try to break down concepts. And parents are also, we also encourage parents to learn what it is that they need to do for their child, so that if the school is not aware of it, then the parent is able to tell the school, oh, this is what my child needs and this is what you need. How about you break this down? How about you tweak this a little, change that, and all of that. So it's evolving, and I think it's evolving at a good rate. There are lots more people who engage in the special needs training that are going on, and so I believe that the chances are getting better. And of course, again, the advocacies that have been going on, more people are aware now. They're no longer people, they're no longer children that get locked up while the family goes out to enjoy and to present themselves to the world. So they also are beginning to get an opportunity to go out there, mix with people, to try new things. People are beginning to learn that they're normal, they're not spiritually bankrupt, or they're not evil. And so they tend to get a lot more input from other people that would ordinarily have stayed off. Parents are not chasing their other children away and saying, don't go there, you're going to catch it. They begin to understand that it's not hereditary, and that it's not contagious, as the case may be. Now, you did ask if it was hereditary.
Yes.
That the causes of autism has not been identified, where science is still carrying out the necessary research. However, there's some things that predispose to a child having autism. First, I need to say that no child is born with autism. It's not that way. They are born with the traits, and if something happens in the process of their development, then those traits are triggered off, and then they tend to go in there. What are the things that?
So the question, yeah. So let's help you, with that now.
Okay.
So
Right.
you would say that they're born with traits, and so there might be risk factors. What are those factors that would expose?
That's what I was going to talk about that next. The factors that predispose to a child having autism include one of the things is the age of the mother, because
When you say the age of the mother, what do you mean?
the older a woman is, for instance, a 45, 50-year-old woman has a risk of having a child with that would come up with any special needs because of the environmental factors that we have now, the pollution, the feeding that we engage in, the sleep culture that we have these days. A number of us are not really living a balanced life, so we're already keeping up somewhere in our own individual life. So when we pass on those eggs and those chromosomes, then they actually tend to be flawed in a way. Another thing is it's been known to be hereditary, to be genetic. For instance, if there's a child in a family that has autism, there's every possibility that another child in that family would have autism. Now, there have been different theories that have been put out that the refrigerator mothers, children who are born and the mothers don't hold them and the mothers don't breastfeed them, they tend to have autism. While there some evidence that also, I mean, you find evidence for almost anything that you're looking for. Scientifically has not been proven yet to be the case. So the many things. So I would say that the food that we eat is affecting us because there's a lot of junk out there, and the way we eat it, the different pollutions and all the other things that are in the environment, we expose to that, but nothing more than that.
So that means that if you're saying that if as parents and if we pay attention to our environment, we pay attention to our health, then it's possible that we have kids. There's a tendency that we might have kids who would come up not with the threat, because if they have the threat and they're exposed to this risk factor, then they now have, autistic children.
Well, I wish I could say that that is the case, right? But there are certain things that, it's usually not that way, but there are certain things that come up. For instance, the earlier a child receives intervention, the greater the chances of them building up and bridging the gap that would ordinarily have become so obvious. Autism really can't be cured, but structures can be put in place to mask some of the traits that they would exhibit. For instance, for a person, we already identified that the social interaction is usually a challenge. But where intervention comes through and it's effective, you will find that the child who ordinarily would have walked into a room and walked through everybody in that room, if there are 50 people bumping into one person or the other, by the time you begin intervention and you take the child through the process, when you get into a room, you look around and then you say hello and you smile and you wait for feedback and then you say something else and the person says this, you say something else. It takes time to build. But once those structures have been built, once you have taken the child through several possible styles or several possible ways that an instance can occur, then when they find themselves in it, they, like you and I, would automatically just go, oh, I've seen this before. When someone says to me, how are you? The response was fine. The response was, I'm good. The response was, I'm not doing too good. And then you give one of those. So the repertoire is expanded. The practice to do it over and over and over helps them to be more spontaneous in responding. So if you would start intervention really early, then all of those things would become, the challenges in those areas would be met. And it will most likely be the stereotypical behavior that would be left. So in a family that has had a child with autism, then for every other child that's born into that family, if they would pay attention to encouraging communication one-on-one, focusing on paying attention to that, ensuring that the child looks in the direction that the child, what we call joint attention. If I smile at you, there's every possibility that you would smile back. If I wave, you would most likely wave back. So I begin to take the baby through the process. I don't wait for the baby to evolve into it the way I would wait for every typical baby. By the time you do those things, it tends to cover the gap and it's not so obvious that the autism is there. So for every family who believes that they're predisposed to having the genes in them or amongst them, then that's one of them. So really, that's what intervention is.
All right, we must say a very big thank you to you, Doyinsola Jawando-Adebomehin. Thanks for your time and thanks for the education that you have brought to Nigerians concerning inclusivity and, of course, children who are autistic. We do appreciate your time this morning. Doyinsola is a certified autism specialist. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, it is still the breakfast on PlusTvAfrica. We'll take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll be looking at the economy, specifically the naira, and depreciation, devaluation, and what it portends, and what we should be doing in a moment. To join us again.